Deep beneath the Atlantic Ocean, there lies a fully intact U.S. Navy aircraft carrier, one that wasn't sunk in battle, wasn't lost to time, but was deliberately sent to the bottom of the sea by the U.S. military itself. This was no accident. This was a calculated operation, a classified experiment that lasted for weeks. Missiles, torpedoes, controlled detonations. The U.S. pounded one of its own carriers with everything it had, and when it was over, the wreck was left to rust in silence. 16,000 feet beneath the waves. Why? Why would the U.S. destroy a fully operational supercarrier? What were they trying to learn? And what does this mean for the future of naval warfare? This is the untold story of USS America, the aircraft carrier the U.S. Navy tried to erase. The USS America, CV-66, wasn't just any aircraft carrier, it was a symbol of U.S. naval dominance. Commissioned in 1965 at the height of the Cold War, the supercarrier was a floating fortress, designed to project American power across the globe. At over 1,000 feet long, it carried 80 aircraft and a crew of nearly 5,000 sailors, making it a vital tool in the United States arsenal. The USS America's service spanned 3 decades. It was there during the Vietnam War, where its jets launched countless missions. It stood guard in the Mediterranean during the Cold War, serving as a deterrent against Soviet aggression. In the Persian Gulf, it enforced no-fly zones and struck targets during Operation Desert Storm. For decades, this carrier was more than a warship. It was a national symbol, an ambassador of American might. But by the late 1990s, times had changed. The Cold War was over, and military budgets were shrinking. The Navy was looking for ways to modernize its fleet while reducing costs. New carriers like the USS Nimitz and the USS Gerald R. Ford were being constructed with cutting-edge technology, and older ships like the USS America were becoming obsolete. By 1996, the USS America was decommissioned. It was no longer fit for modern warfare, and the Navy faced a choice. Scrap the ship, turn it into a museum, or do something else. They saw an opportunity, a way to use the USS America one final time, not as a museum piece, but as a sacrificial lamb in one of the most ambitious and controversial experiments in naval history. And so, the decision was made. The USS America would be deliberately sunk, not in a battlefield blaze of glory, but in a controlled operation so secretive that even today, parts of it remain classified. What was the Navy trying to accomplish? Why destroy one of its most iconic carriers? To understand, we need to dive deeper into the experiment itself, an operation that would push the limits of naval engineering and redefine how the U.S. prepared for war. The decision to sink USS America wasn't just about getting rid of an old warship, it was about learning how to build better ones. The U.S. Navy had a problem. Aircraft carriers were the backbone of American military power, but no one truly knew how well they could withstand modern weapons. How much punishment could a supercarrier take before sinking? Could its defenses hold up against missile strikes? What would happen if an enemy managed to land a devastating blow? The Pentagon wanted answers, so rather than scrap USS America, they turned it into a floating laboratory. They named the project SINKEX, Sinking Exercise 2005, but unlike other naval target exercises where old ships were quickly sunk with a few torpedoes, USS America's fate would be much more extreme. For 4 weeks, the Navy launched an all-out assault on its own aircraft carrier. First, they started small, testing controlled detonations inside the ship, mimicking explosions that might happen during combat. Engineers placed charges in key locations to see how the ship's bulkheads, armor, and internal compartments held up under stress. Then, they escalated. The Navy fired missiles at the USS America, hitting it with the same kinds of weapons an enemy would use in battle. They launched aerial bombardments, simulating airstrikes against a carrier under attack. They unleashed torpedoes, blasting its hull below the waterline to study how quickly it took on water. Every impact was carefully studied, recorded, and analyzed. Engineers examined how fire spread through the ship, how compartments flooded, and how long the carrier could stay afloat under relentless assault. The goal? To design future carriers that could take a hit and keep fighting. One of the biggest concerns was the flight deck, the heart of any carrier. The Navy wanted to know how much damage it could sustain before becoming inoperable. Could a modern carrier withstand missile attacks and still launch aircraft? They also tested the survivability of critical systems, communications, navigation, and damage control systems, all vital for keeping a ship operational during war. But there was something else that made this test different. The Navy didn't just want to see how USS America took damage. They wanted to see how long they could keep it afloat. For weeks, despite relentless attacks, USS America refused to sink. It absorbed everything the Navy threw at it, bombs, missiles, torpedoes, and still remained stubbornly above water. In fact, the ship was so resilient that Navy engineers had to board the half-sunken wreck and set final explosive charges just to finish the job. Finally, on May 14, 2005, after enduring more than any carrier in history, USS America slipped beneath the waves, coming to rest over 16,000 feet below the Atlantic Ocean. A warship that had once projected American power around the world was now a silent ghost on the ocean floor. But what lessons did it leave behind? The sinking of USS America wasn't just an explosive test. It completely changed how the US Navy thinks about aircraft carriers. For starters, these ships are a lot tougher than anyone expected. The USS America endured weeks of relentless attacks, bombs, missiles, torpedoes, yet it refused to go down. Even when the Navy did everything it could to sink its own warship, the carrier held on. That's a powerful lesson. It proved that American aircraft carriers aren't just floating air bases. They're some of the most resilient war machines ever built. But toughness alone wasn't enough. The experiment also exposed weak points, places where damage spread too fast, compartments that flooded too easily. Engineers studied every failure, every crack in the armor, and used that knowledge to make modern carriers even stronger. That's why today's Ford-class carriers have better bulkheads, reinforced flight decks, and state-of-the-art damage control systems. The USS America showed the Navy exactly where improvements were needed, and those lessons are now built into every carrier that sails today. The Navy also learned just how deadly torpedoes could be. Some missile strikes barely made a dent, but torpedoes, they were devastating. That led to new anti-submarine defenses, better countermeasures, and an increased focus on stopping attacks before they happen. But beyond the engineering and strategy, this experiment sent a message to every potential enemy watching. If an outdated, decommissioned carrier could survive this much punishment, imagine what a modern one could withstand in battle. The US didn't just sink the USS America, it turned it into a warning. And that raises the final question. Was it worth it? The USS America could have been preserved. It could have become a floating museum, a tribute to the thousands of sailors who served on it, a place where Americans could walk its decks and learn about its storied past. Instead, it was sent to the bottom of the ocean. For some, that decision still doesn't sit right. The USS America wasn't an old battleship from World War II, long past its prime. It was a modern, nuclear-capable aircraft carrier, one of the most powerful warships ever built. And instead of honoring its legacy, the Navy used it for target practice. But for others, its final mission was its most important one. The knowledge gained from the USS America's destruction directly shaped the carriers that followed. Without this test, the Ford-class carriers, the backbone of America's naval power today, might not have been built with the same level of survivability. Every lesson learned, every weak point exposed, every reinforced system on today's carriers can be traced back to the sinking of USS America. And there's another reality, one that military planners don't like to talk about. If a war ever breaks out between global superpowers, aircraft carriers will be the first targets. Hypersonic missiles, submarine-launched torpedoes, and cyber warfare could all be used to cripple these massive ships. The sinking of USS America was a necessary sacrifice, a way to prepare for the wars of the future by learning how to keep these giants afloat when the first shot is fired. So was it worth it? That depends on who you ask. The USS America never fell in battle. It was never sunk by an enemy fleet. Instead, it was taken down by the very nation it once defended. But in its destruction, it gave birth to a stronger, deadlier generation of carriers, ensuring that American naval power remains unmatched. The only question left is, when the next war comes, will the lessons from the USS America be enough? The USS America may be gone, but its legacy is still sailing across the world's oceans. The carriers that came after it, stronger, more advanced, and more survivable, owe their design to the lessons learned from its destruction. And while you're here, don't just watch history, be a part of it. Enlist in this channel's ranks by smashing that subscribe button. We've got more untold military stories coming your way, and you don't want to miss what's next. Until next time, stand strong and stay sharp.